Off the ball, friends. What a Monday show we have for you, because frankly it was a ridiculous weekend. Andy Farrell's insatiable desire for adversity reportedly was met. We didn't think it could happen, but we got there. Keane Healy at hooker, Van der Fleer on line-out duty. That's more like it, said Farrell. Now we're talking. Rory O'Connor, Gordon Darcy on Monday Night Rugby as Ireland within touching distance of a Grand Slam. Meanwhile, the BBC, it would seem, has completely crumbled, although Tim Davie has denied that. Gary Lineker back on air. He most certainly will not apologise, and he will bloody tweet what he wants in future. That seems to be the deal. We'll talk to Simon Cooper after 9 o'clock. Pat Nevin as well, who interestingly did go on the BBC yesterday. Pretty much the only pundit who went on, so we'll talk to Pat about that. Plus this hour, Tommy Welch talks hurling. The Hurling League, not since the BBC, the Hurling League, have we seen an institution receive such bad press. There is an air of, what is the point of this, in a lot of people's eyes. So curious to see what Tommy makes of it all. 53106, text number. We're at Off the Ball on Twitter. Michael McCarthy, hello. A lot of issues there to get through.
There's a few to get through. This is one of those classic Mondays. We're in mid-March now. We've got 3 months of this now where we just have to. We won't fit everything into Monday show.
Apparently at half-time, to be confirmed, but Andy Farrell at Hulk Hogan style ripped his shirt and started screaming, "More adversity."
I was talking to Stephen Doyle about this in the office earlier. He was saying, he's like, that adversity thing, it's one of those things I just want to be cynical about. I just assume that, it's just like, oh, stop banging on about these things. But then this is exactly what happens. And, it's like, the way they reacted,
Yeah.
Unbelievable character.
The way it's all been talked about, it's gone completely OTT now, the adversity thing.
Yeah.
Dave McSavage used to do a version of Joe Duffy where he was a masochist and would put pegs on his nipples, and the more awful the phone call, the more into it he would get. I feel like there's a David McSavage, Andy Farrell version coming your way soon.
Yeah.
Good Lord, Joe.
I'm just gonna.
That's where your mind went.
Are you not seeing that, Richie?
Your nipple clamps on Andy Farrell, and it's only 5 minutes past 7.
Not since Louis van Gaal has masochism been on my radar with a coach.
Great interviews.
Just to gloss over all of that, the adversity in the reason we were talking about it was another thing that actually did happen at halftime, as well as the Hulk Hogan, t-shirt tear, was Farrell talking about the players kind of laughing. And I just love that. And it's one of those things, they didn't, it wasn't that they found it funny. It was right, I can't believe this is happening. But that's just the position that they're in. They're I don't know whether they thought this is all going against us, we can't win, we can win. But if the fact it was that they were able to just go what the F is happening here, lads, and have that sort of attitude to it, as opposed to panic, worry, or any of those other negative vibes that you could bring into something like that. Instead of it's what are we going to do here? What are we going to do? Oh, look, we've got a plan. And they went out and executed that plan to a way that they couldn't have expected. And then Scotland helped them along the way, I would say, as well. But we'll get into all that later.
Richie, as Conan came off the bench to perform brilliantly, as Van der Fleer fired in line-outs, as Keane Healy was part of a scrum-winning pack, I presume you, like most of us, did say to yourself, bloody hell, there is genuinely something very, very special happening with this team.
Yeah, it's weird. I was talking about it with Martin King and Ireland AM yesterday, and when you're talking and previewing a match, you're kind of thinking, yeah, you want to tip Ireland to win because all the evidence suggests that they are going to win and that they are the better side. And then when they manage to do that and press that point home without a hooker on the pitch, with Josh Van der Fleer throwing lineouts, and I think only throwing one bad one. In essence, there was one that he overshot.
The first one, yeah.
And then from then on, he had his eye in. But generally, to do that and to put a score on Scotland in the second half, when I know Hugh Cahill was pointing out in commentary, Scotland made virtue during the entire competition so far of that third quarter, where between half-time and the 60th minute, they would manage to put the majority of their points on the board, and Ireland kept them scoreless in the second half, which is with the diminished playing squad that they had at their disposal. It's not hubris and it's not arrogance to say that this team is genuinely something quite special in the history of Irish sport, because as good as the peaks have been for different teams, I think they've been pretty brief with other rugby teams in particular. Yeah. This one seems like it's obviously sustained for a year, 2 years now at this stage, really. and looks like it could go even further. And we should revel in it while it's there and not be nervous about it and not be, reluctant about praising it, because they are something quite special.
Because actually,
I don't know, there's still that thing in the back of people's minds where it's like, look, it might go wrong. Like even going into the Scotland game yesterday, look, Finn Russell, yada, yada, yada. And Rob Kearney was brilliant with you on Saturday, Joe, where he pointed out Finn Russell's a decent player, but by God does he make some amount of mistakes. And he did again yesterday.
Kearney's not buying it. Thinks that the hype has been way OTT. There's still too many deficiencies there, and it's he's having a good tournament.
He got ran over after 5 minutes, and they mentioned that on commentary. You know what I mean? That's a huge part of rugby. You can't just not do that.
To Richie's point, given the series win in New Zealand and the various other things they do, were they to win the Grand Slam at the weekend and make the quarter-final stages at the World Cup and get knocked out, let's say for a second, by an amazing French performance in front of 80,000 at the Stade de France, they still, by dint of their CV, this Grand Slam included, and the test win in the series win rather in New Zealand, they go down as the greatest Irish team that we've seen.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, I mean, we do have to see what they do with the World Cup, because like losing in the quarter-final it can be different in many different ways. But as you said, you lose 27-26 in an all-time classic, the greatest game in World Cup history, to France.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter where you go out. That's something that we're all obsessing over because of history.
Yeah.
But for this actual team, that's something that can happen and not really massively affect them. They can be the best, second best, or joint best team in the world. You know what I mean? And no other Irish team has ever really been that.
Yeah.
So, again,
and I do accept,
you don't want to be just hanging on just results.
No, sure. And I do accept, were they to blow it massively and it's an 07 World Cup, then of course that.
No, it does hang out. It would make a huge difference. But just on so watching that yesterday, just in terms of how big an achievement it is, and what they did. Again, we've won in Murrayfield plenty of times. Scotland weren't great in the second half. That's important. But Ireland kind of killed their spirit, I think, by reacting in the way they did in the, after about 10 minutes of madness. Ireland calmed down, got 2 quick tries, and Scotland couldn't react to it. But Scotland, Richie was saying about all the points they get in that second quarter, you're thinking this is a way, you're sitting there going, this is a Grand Slam gone by circumstance. What a disaster.
Yeah.
It's because of this, and you're just assuming that this is going to catch up with Ireland. And instead, the opposite happened. And not only did they stop Scotland's tide, but Scotland never had a chance of a score, 3 points or 7 points in the second half of that game. They didn't have a chance. They never really played. Were they in the 22 at all in the second half? Not to my memory, but yet it felt like it was slipping away for 10 minutes because Ireland, with all the madness in the line out and the scrum, especially when Kelleher was still on, and the idea that Healy was going to come on and what was going to happen, they panicked a little bit in a very understandable way. But they actually never, Scotland never actually took any advantage of it or looked like they were going to score any point. And it's incredible how on top of things and how professional that Irish team stayed and how they were able to actually go and win really easily in the end. That's actually one of the most important things here. This was a handy win.
The last 20 minutes, once Lowe scored that try, those 2 tries in 4 minutes, you could very comfortably have turned off the TV because the game was over. Ireland were in total control. Scotland looked like maybe they'd gassed themselves out of touch in trying to set this ferocious pace. Gibson Park actually, instead of Ireland trying to stay with Scotland, Ireland went off to another level. We'll talk about it with Rory and Gordon Darcy later on. I know Rory, for instance, thinks it's bizarre the extent to which Scotland did not try and take advantage of the Irish line-out.
I just thought they were just going to keep kicking it into touch at one point and didn't really understand why they didn't.
Yeah. And even though, and Hugh Cal did say in commentary after Van der Fleer overthrew the first line-out and then went to the front predominantly thereafter, 3 guesses, Scotland. What do you think Van der Fleer is going to do? Force him to go to the back. Otherwise, populate the front of that line out with as much pressure as possible. And by the way, let's keep kicking out. And Rory also was making the point that Kelleher maybe was on the field for 10 minutes and
he wasn't there. He wasn't
couldn't lift his
carrying.
arm.
He was.
But they never made him tackle. They never went after him. They didn't get him to throw more lineouts or Van der Fleer throw more lineouts. So something went badly awry at the same time with Scotland. I don't think it's the old traditional, Scotland capitulated, because in the first half, Scotland were brilliant. They're really good. They were a bit scary at times.
Their centre partnership is amazing.
Yeah, genuinely really good. So they didn't capitulate, they didn't get weighed down by the Triple Crown pressure and the atmosphere. They were there. But second half, I don't know, is it like a rugby IQ issue or a maturity issue or what? But something went badly awry for them. Now, we don't have to spend Monday trying to figure that out.
No, but there has to be something in it, because I mean, I think there is a little bit of interest in what the Scottish rugby psyche is and what the problems are here, because we've been dealing with it for so long, and whether there is hubris on their side or not, I suppose that's a debate for another day. But you know, they ran out the ball out of play, you know, early in the it wasn't very long into that try scoring chance. They didn't need to go hell for leather, and then time ran out at the end of the first half. Ireland went in ahead when they had no business to, when the whole first half was just dominated by those injuries, you know, and
there was the
I don't know if they ever came back from
Van der Merwe not passing to Hogan and Klein outside him.
Yeah.
So they'll have some regrets. I know, actually, Richie, Gary Ringrose is your first story, so we'll start the news round. It's brought to you with Gillette Labs. You can get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition is available now, and there is positive news on Ringrose, because I mean, as he, Rich, sat there half sitting up with his hand in the air but also not moving, like it was chilling. It was awful.
It was.
You know, it really was.
And the amount of time that it took, I guess, to remove him from the field as well, albeit it ended with a thumbs up. But as expected, yesterday's win over Scotland has had a huge impact on the Ireland squad ahead of their Grand Slam decider. Gary Ringrose is said to be doing well, and indeed back in Dublin, having been stretchered off due to a blow to the head from Blair Kinghorn's leg in yesterday's win over Scotland. Ian Henderson, meanwhile, he has to undergo surgery on a fractured arm. He left Murrayfield in a cast yesterday, having been removed after 24 minutes. Caelan Doris is going to have a hip complaint managed by the Ireland medical staff this week, but Andy Farrell yesterday was hopeful that Doris will be fit. Dan Sheehan and Ronan Kelleher nurse shoulder injuries. They too will be managed. But Ulster hooker Tom Stewart and Leinster lock Ross Maloney have been added to the squad this week. Jack Conan was among the tries yesterday and was delighted with the nature of Ireland's win.
Resilience. I think, we obviously overcame a lot of adversity early on. You're losing incredibly good players. Some things you can't prep for. You know, Josh having to throw into the line out, Keane Healy coming on playing hooker in the scrums. So look, they're things you don't worry about during the week, but it's a testament to the squad about how we just got on with it. We didn't let it phase us. We just kept on trying to play our own game, and so many lads stepped up to the mantle today, and it's fantastic. And I was saying to some lads earlier, it was one of the greatest days in green I've ever been a part of, and you nearly feel emotional about it, talking about it afterwards, about how proud you are of each other, about how much hard work, how much sacrifice you put into it, and to go out there and get the win when it wasn't easy, and you're 7-0 down or 7-3 down at one stage, and you kind of keep on hammering at it, you keep on pounding that rock and trying to be better, and to pay off in the end. It's just fantastic. So lads are delighted. We obviously need to be a lot better in some regards, but it was just such a great day to be part of as an Irish team.
He was exceptional.
He was brilliant when he came on,
circumstances. England, Rich, they've lost the ball carrier that is Ollie Lawrence. However,
they have Manny Tuilagi available again after suspension. He had been serving a ban up until this weekend after a red card received on club duty in February. Ollie Lawrence will be missing for their trip to Dublin. However, the Bath Centre sustained a hamstring injury in their record-breaking defeat to France on Saturday. Leicester's Guy Porter has been called in as cover, while Sale-Lock Johnny Hill and Harlequins hooker Will Collier also pad out Steve Borthwick's squad this week.
Now, dreadful and shocking news as well.
Yeah, widespread shock at the sudden death of Offaly football manager Liam Kearns. He'd taken a training session with the panel yesterday morning but complained of feeling unwell later in the day. He's mourned by his wife Angela and daughters Rachel and Laura, as well as the wider GAA community. Kearns had spells in charge of Tipperary, Laois and Limerick before taking over from John Maughan in the faithful county in August of last year. Speaking to Midlands Radio today, Offaly chairman Michael Dignan was among the many to pay tribute to Kearns.
When he came to Offaly last July, I met him first up in the Faithful Fields. He drove up to meet me, and from day one we just hit it off. He was a straight talker. There was no nonsense. He loved his football. He was very passionate about wanting to come to Offaly. He had lots of other offers on the table, but he saw what we were trying to do, where we were trying to go, and he wanted to be part of that journey. And poignantly, he said to me back in the Faithful Fields that day that this would be his last job in inter-county football, and we didn't think it'd end like this.
No, he certainly wouldn't have meant in these circumstances. Dreadful. Condolences to all. It's really shocking, so sudden, awful.
Yeah, so sad. I was watching the hurling highlights last night when that news kind of broke on Twitter, and you had to really take a second look. It was he's 60 years of age. Richie mentioned that they took Offaly training yesterday morning by accounts, really good form, everything completely normal, and that's hard to get your head around. That's hard to get your head around. Someone who's been such a scene on the Gaelic football landscape for so long, and still to be such a big part of it, and just kind of embarking on this Offaly journey, and there's excitement about a rebirth in Offaly, and Liam Kearns was supposed to be a big part of this year, and just condolences to his family and to everyone around him, but like just in terms of just even hearing this news, it's a hard one to get your head around, isn't it?
It sure is, yeah. Richie, the Gary Lineker BBC saga is at an end for the time being anyway.
Yeah, it is. BBC Today reinstated Gary Lineker after a dramatic weekend. Director General Tim Davey confirmed their climb down this morning, apologising to the corporation's staff, contributors, presenters and audience, but not, interestingly, Lineker. On Twitter, Lineker thanked his colleagues for their remarkable show of solidarity. He again highlighted the plight of refugees arriving into the UK, adding that the UK remains, quote, a country of predominantly tolerant, welcoming and generous people.
So it seems like a complete and total climb down in that Lineker is certainly not apologising, certainly not backing down, and seemingly returns with no restrictions on what he can tweet about going forward.
So, name escapes me. Sorry, Tim Davey. Sorry,
you've heard that name 6,000 times.
I've heard it too many times to remember it. It's actually gone. It's scrambled my brain. But he did an interview straight after where he was asked directly, is Gary Lineker going to stop tweeting? And he's like, Gary has agreed until we come up with this new system and these new rules that he will abide by the guidelines. And then the next thing I seen, honestly, as I was still watching that, was Lineker's tweet that Richie just read out, which I don't know if it, again, can you describe that as party political, what he said there? I would say no, but that's the entire argument ever. I would imagine that the BBC or Davey see it as that. So, interesting that Lineker seemingly does have restrictions on what he can say based on the agreement, but I think Gary was very quick to, dip his toe in the water to show that might not actually be the case in practice.
Looking at their social media review. Yeah, they'll get to the bottom of it. But the social media guidelines do stipulate that if you're a presenter of profile, be that in Lineker's case where he's, I suppose, a freelancer of sorts or staff, that there is an obligation to be impartial. But in practice, it's pretty clear after this, he can tweet whatever he wants going forward. I'm just curious to see to what extent he's now going to lean into that.
I don't think he will.
I don't either.
Lineker isn't that guy. Do you know what I mean?
I think he has been taken aback by all this as well.
Yeah, I think he felt very, very strongly and understandably so. And there's an argument that we don't have to get into now that even the point that he was making shouldn't have even had to be what they would call party political. You know what I mean? It was human rights, but whether that's impartial or not, there is a lot of contradictory guidelines towards what BBC presenters can do, and there's a very specific guideline that even uses sport as an example of somebody that isn't, a sports presenter wouldn't be tied to the same level of impartiality as a news reporter, etc. So there's an awful lot of different contradictory things there. So
and contradictory enforcement. So many examples where it hasn't been enforced. And
there's still questions about how this came to be as regards his being stood down at the weekend, and because BBC Sport were happy enough for things to go ahead as normal, but seemingly the word came from on high. This is in the Athletic this morning,
right?
That essentially it was from the higher ups in the BBC had stipulated this happened. And Davey is some man for the climb down, I have to say. I think this is his third major one.
It's not a climb down. It's not a climb down.
Well, he was in charge of audio and music at the BBC back in 2010 when he ordered the closure of the Asian Network and BBC Six Music, only to be shown that was in fact a wrong decision, and they're both still on air at the moment and doing decent ratings. BBC Three is back on TV schedules as well, haven't been taken off, and being a digital only platform. So quite how Davey manages to run things from here on in with any degree of authority is it remains to be seen.
Well, he's passionate about impartiality.
Pat Nevin,
deep passion.
And climb downs.
Pat Nevin, one of the only pundits to go on BBC over the weekend.
Yeah, I'm interested as to why.
Yeah, so we'll talk to Pat after 9. He's his own man to the end, so I'm really curious to see why. Because what Lineker tweeted would be right up Pat's street in terms of politics. So, like I said, I haven't talked to him. I don't know why. So we'll talk to Pat after 9.
We're kind of understandably the climb down and where we are with the Lineker story. But I think we should reflect on, regardless of rights and wrongs or anything like that, how absolutely mental the entire weekend was. From Friday afternoon, all the way through to Saturday night, until we got whatever that was that they didn't even call match of the day, that 20 minutes of silent football, is one of the most remarkable sport/media stories that I think has ever happened. You know, just the absolute like avalanche of it over the course of Friday. I could not refresh my Twitter feed quick enough, and it's a terrible trait because there's an important story underlying all this in what Lineker even tweeted about in the first place, and you know the story becoming about celebrity TV presenter rather than the actual rather cruel policy and cruel language that Lineker is talking about is unfortunate, and it's not great to buy into it, but I couldn't help it. It was so fascinating the way it backfired so much on them and so quickly, and how quickly it all escalated. Yeah. Amazing weekend. Like,
it was an extra 500,000 watch match of the day, Premier League highlights on the Saturday evening. It was really boring.
I would like to see if they all stuck with the full 20 minutes.
It was hard to stay with it, I found. It's just like losing concentration or something.
Imagine being a blind person watching that, Joe, who was pointed out as well on Sunday morning. That was a real slap in the face to any partially sighted viewers that would have been on BBC on Saturday night.
I'm not sure what their options were.
Did they not have rights to the World Feed?
Well, that's what...
No.
Okay. No, one of the commentators who released a statement said that they should use the World Rights Feed, but
I don't think they had rights for some reason. There's a certain quirk there that the Origin Match of the Day doesn't have rights to its own World Feed. But there was a point Jonathan Lew had written a piece several months ago making the argument that football could be better without commentators at this stage. The picture quality is so good. We all know the players. They're not adding that much in the main. Let us watch the football. It'll be all akin to a stadium experience.
Yeah. What did you think?
Well, after Premier League highlights on Saturday, I disagree.
Yeah. There's an element. I would like to see a little bit of a bigger sample size, because there's an element sometimes when I'm watching the game that I feel like I'm being taken over by what Jamie Carragher's opinion is, and I'm thinking more about what he's really angry that something wasn't a penalty, and he's going on about it for 10 minutes, and I'm only really taking in that rather than what I'm seeing in front of me. And there is an argument that I wouldn't mind a world away from that, but I don't know if the answer is just no commentary.
Yeah,
you know, I think it needs to be, maybe it's a little bit more less narrative based and more just say what's in front of you, you know.
Just in the football show, we're going to talk to Simon Cooper as well, almost to sketch out the wider backdrop here, which is fascinating. And he's written a book, Chums, How a Tiny Cast of Oxford Tories Took Over the UK. Really good book, highly recommended. It's excellent. And, you know, he's trying to pick apart, as somebody who went to Oxford himself, how it is that 14 of 17 prime ministers since 1940 all went to Oxford, and most went to Eton as well. And so, for instance, the Tory pressure on the BBC, Alistair Campbell, who's been everywhere as well, is very much painting this as this is the defund the BBC Tories, putting massive political pressure, screaming down the phone practically on the BBC hierarchy to do something about Lineker. Now, I'm not sure if it's that, as Campbell says, or if it's more the Oxford Conservative Brigade, who seem to run all these institutions, having a polite, hello old pal, do something about Lineker there, will you?
Yeah.
No problem. Because we've all been hearing about over the last few days about the loan for Boris and the hierarchy of the BBC. So Simon's going to come on and just explain more about the weird way of power.
It's a weird one.
It's
a weird one for them, because at a point there was clearly fear within the BBC that the Tory government had such power and looked like they had an endless road in front of them, that the idea of it being defunded and the licence fee being done away with and it being privatised, etc., was a real possibility. Like, they're looking at a Tory government now, regardless of the influence that will be within the BBC, and it's certainly there with Richard Sharp and Tim Davie, that this is a government that doesn't have a mandate anymore, that is really running out of road in terms of what it can do electorally, and probably won't get in at the next election. So they don't necessarily have to kowtow in the same way that they probably did in the last few years to the Tories. And it's probably they're probably better off using this as a benchmark for what has gone before and what will come next, and moving on and moving past it, and moving past that fear.
There's loads, by the way, in this piece with Simon that's fascinating. Again, it's getting, I appreciate for a sports show, it'll be getting a touch outside the tram lines specifically of Lineker, but it's just fascinating. So, he'll argue why the prime ministers who were involved in various world wars had a certain empathy for their fellow man, whilst understanding that we're better than our fellow man, but a certain empathy, whereas just the latest batch, the 1980s cabal that have been in really since Cameron on, they're almost like frivolous and don't really know what to do anymore except try and take back power from Brussels because it's their birthright to run the show. But it's amazing that he was talking about the debating societies where like all these guys are all mates and they go on to run the country. But so at that time when Simon was there, if in the debate anyone, prepared and brought facts, as opposed to Boris Johnson just quoting from the classics and, speaking in an entertaining way, they would get booed and people would shout, facts, as in, you've used a fact. That's not allowed in a debate, It's like a real no-no. Right. So there's all sorts of interesting stuff.
Grim old world we live in, Joe. That's all I really have to say.
Well, I mean, when you draw a line from that to Michael Gove saying people have had their fill of experts, it's a really interesting detail.
There was a lot in this weekend, and like what I'm taking from it today is like how mad a story it was and how quickly it all moved. But there's a lot of sad things in there as well. Like there is just about the state of the world and the state of media and politics. But
it is depressing.
I think Dion, actually, people, not to be promoting their own stuff, but I thought Dion summed it up really well in the paper review yesterday, talking about how like politics has changed and our guidelines and the way we talk about politics in a so-called impartial way also need to reflect that. They need to reflect that these things can't be taken on face value anymore. They can't be taken for what they claim to be. And therefore, real impartiality, if you think about it, and I'm quoting myself, I'm talking for myself now rather than for Dion, real impartiality actually needs to be truth and the challenge of all these things. Whereas what impartiality in America, and more so in Britain, and it's going to happen here as well, has been portrayed as is taking on both sides of every story. But both sides of every story aren't always right.
But the impartiality thing as well on that's not just a political thing. If you look at the way the Anthony Taylor situation has been handled yesterday by journalists who essentially are on the Manchester United beat and on the Manchester United beat alone, and I don't think in a lot of instances it needs a lot of 2 and 2 together equals 4ing to realise that they're probably Manchester United supporters underneath it. The way Taylor has been treated online by a certain cadre of journalists over the past 24 hours has been disgraceful, and he's been hounded, and that's because of essentially journalistic impartiality.
Okay. Before we completely get way out of kilter here, one last story. It is worth mentioning. So this Katie Taylor fight is happening.
It is indeed, yeah. Chantel Cameron says a fight with Katie Taylor is one she's always wanted. The undisputed super lightweight champion has been confirmed as Taylor's opponent for her homecoming bout at the 3 Arena on May 20th. Matchroom say ticket details will be released soon. They'll be like gold dust. Just added to the card today is the WBA super welterweight title clash of Terry Harper and Cecilia Brækhus. We should mention too the Republic of Ireland under-17s qualifying for the European Championships today. A 96-minute goal from Nixon Okason secured a 3-2 win over Cyprus this afternoon. Saw Colin O'Brien side finish top of their group above Italy, and the finals will take place in Hungary in May.
Okay, very good. Richie, thanks very much.
Nice lads.
Michael, thank you.
Thanks, Joe.